But in a situation where you find that a person look like the same,
not necessarily tribal or regional.
I have said that.
All right, thank you for staying with us. We'll be taking a look at the front pages of our newspapers this morning, and we have Sunday Michael, Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust newspaper, in the studio to give perspectives on this. Now, we'll begin with the Daily Trust newspaper, and that's where you have a lot of stories, really, reactions trailing the death of little Hanifa, the little 5-year-old that was killed in Kano, kidnapped and killed actually by her own teacher. The first story there says, Hanifa, I will sign death warrant of killer. That's according to the governor of Kano State, Ganduje. The writers there says, I align with Sheikh Gadon Kaya on public execution. That's according to Aisha Buhari, the wife of the president. And then also, Kano government revokes private schools' licenses. So you get details of that story in the Daily Trust newspaper. Abiola denied proper medical attention, and family replies Abdul Salami. Recall that interview with General Abdul Salami Abubakar with Trust TV, and that's causing a lot of reactions now. The general has said, the general retired, has said that, well, he didn't die because he took tea, and he made some clarification on some of the allegations that were raised, but clearly we're seeing reactions from the family. You can get details of that on page 12. The lead story on Daily Trust talks about FG backtracks, retains petrol subsidy. 2022 budget amendment to cover payments beyond June. Build refineries as permanent solution, experts tell government. Shelf protest, Lawan tells Labour. And then the pictorial there will show you killer school proprietor Abdul Malik Tanko and 2 other accused persons arraigned for the murder of 5-year-old Hanifa Abubakar in Kano yesterday. Those are the pictures you are seeing there. Beside that, Nigeria's world's highest number of out-of-school children. That's according to the UNICEF. That's quite an alarming one. 13 million out-of-school children. That's the world highest. And a lot of people have said that, look, that's a disaster in the waiting. It's an explosion awaiting us, because if you look at that number of out-of-school children and the implication of having that large number of children out of school, it's really something to worry about. The next one, how rice, beans, tomato jacked up December's inflation figures, and that's on page 19. Explosion rocks church in Taraba, and these are the major stories on the front page of Daily Trust this morning.
Okay, let's take a look at other stories on the Punch newspaper this morning. The lead story there states, Labour set for protest. Federal government suspends subsidy removal. MBA wants government. And the riders, no going back on protest. We observe deceit in new twist, says Labour. You'd also see removal suicidal now. Federal government's action political for 2023 elections. That's according to the NBA. Subsidy removal timing wrong, says Minister. Lowell begs unions. You'd also see other stories. Federal government probes online banks over breach of customers' data privacy, and that story is on page 29. On page 29 on the Punch newspaper. You'd also see Autogas. Federal government to convert 200,000 vehicles, plans 580 refueling centers. Court issues warrant for Dizzani's arrest over failed extradition. You find details of that story on page 8. You'd also see federal government local currency debts to hit 4 trillion in 2022, says report. You'd also see a pictorial there of the coalition of a coalition of civil society groups storms PDP APC secretariats, demands Southern president. You'd find other stories there. JAM announces 2022 UTME registration, reject repentant cheats apology. Businessman, filling station attendant shot dead as gunmen storm Ondo community. You'd also see FAAN kicks as customs comptroller breaches airport security, seizes gate forcefully. Oh, that's quite controversial. You'll find the details of that story on page 29 on the Punch newspaper. These are some of the major stories you can find.
All right, let's take a look at the Nation newspaper this morning. And there, the lead story talks about government, petrol subsidy stays. And then the rider, policy ill-timed, says Finance Minister. Lawan urges Labour to shelve protests. So, again, the story says on the Daily Trust newspaper, government is backtracking, and that's what it means really, because when you hear the Finance Minister now says that the policy is ill-timed, you wonder, what were you thinking from the beginning, you know? All right, the other stories at the top, you know, of the Nation newspaper. Ogun Monarch, 3 others killed over chieftaincy now. And then murder of 5-year-old Hanifa, governor revokes private school licenses, school burnt, suspects arraigned. Then you see the next one, JAM fixes April for UTME, UN, AU, ECOWAS condemn coup in Burkina Faso, PDP voids Ekiti Congress. And there you have also other stories. UBEC to build 3.6 billion naira smart schools in 6 zones. SAN, 6 lawyers face sanctions over conflicting court orders. These are the few stories on the front page of the Nation today.
All right, let's take a look at one more paper, talking about the Guardian newspaper. The lead story there says federal government sets aside PIA to pay 4.6 trillion naira on fuel subsidy. The riders 6 amendments of 2022 budget. NLC, no going back on January 27th nationwide protest. You'd also find join Labour rallies. Falana urges Nigerians. Lowell begs Labour to shelve Thursday protest, says it's no longer necessary. Why TUC is opting out of protests. You'd also see APC Lord suspension, Afenifere fault decision, MBA, federal government suspension and election strategy. And you also find this story about Autogas policy on course, says Silva. And other stories on The Guardian this morning. SAN, 6 others may be sanctioned over conflicting orders. And on page 3, CSO storm APC PDP headquarters, demand Southern president in 2023. NAFDAC halts registration of alcohol in sachet glass bottles below 200 milliliters. And you also find on page 9 on the Guardian newspaper, Diri sacks monarch, others as abducted commissioner regains freedom. These are some of the major stories on the Guardian newspaper this morning.
All right. So let's get perspectives on some of these stories today on the front pages of our papers with Sunday Michael. Good morning. Welcome to Daybreak.
Morning. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Welcome to the program.
Well, quite a number of stories, and we'd like to begin with that of Hanifa Abubakar. That's a story that, you know, caused a lot of reactions everywhere. Well, the governor is saying, I'm going to sign a death warrant, and the wife of the president is also calling for, you know, public prosecution of that. But will that be enough? I mean, there's a column here that I didn't mention while taking a look at the Daily Trust newspaper. Yeah. You will want to read it. Very interesting. It says, sorry, no justice for Hanifa Abubakar. Whatever that means. You will want to get the details of that when you pick a copy. So I'm just wondering, will that, you know, be enough to say, okay, yeah, justice is served?
The real question would really be, how much is enough for a life that has been lost. I mean, to the parents of Hanifa, nothing is enough. Nothing absolutely is enough. And it is not just about what had happened at the school. It is us, the society, failing Hanifa. I mean, a couple of months ago, it was worried about boarding schools and bullying and children coming out from where should be safe environments, you know, with all kinds of poisoning to their body. And now it's a day school, it's a 5-year-old by the proprietor of the school. It leaves so much to worry about. I was shivering when I saw the headlines when it first happened. I was avoiding the story. I didn't want to destroy my mood. I avoided certain social media platforms, you know, where this information just readily comes on your face. But it shifted to the WhatsApp group. You know, I tried as much as possible not to read it until my own wife had to send it to me, you know. And it became obvious that there was no running away from it. It's as bad as it got. And you could see the kind of reaction that it elicited from a very beautiful young lady. You know, life sniffed out of her and then decapitated, buried right there in the soil of the school with support or assistance from another person. So if you look at the horror, if you imagine the horror, you then begin to say, how much is really enough justice? You know, because it is a series of failure that has led us to the point where these kind of things happen. And I mean, we were just mentioning it, the case has been adjourned to February 7th. Perhaps for another 1 or 2 years. That is what we will continue to see until there is a public sort of fatigue around the issue, and then someday maybe a fitting judgment will be given, somehow maybe not. But if you even look at the reaction of the person who did it, the ease with which he was granting public, press interviews and all, you begin to wonder whether there is even any remorse in this person about what he has done. And painfully, I hope what he has done does not sell ideas to other people who are like him, who are unfit, you know, to run public schools like that. I mean, the government comes up to say they are reviewing license. For me, is it about license reviewer or about monitoring and evaluation? Okay. Do schools inspectors still show up in public or even private schools? I mean, unannounced visits to see the condition under which people study? Do we send mystery shoppers to make any kind of observations? Does the government have any kind of forum where parents of siblings can independently report how a school system is run or the kind of maltreatments that happen? You know, is there any kind of evaluation of the people we call teachers or proprietors, or even the environment under which our students study? And I mean, if you can provide answers to all of this, then you can begin to ask whether or not we have not failed Hanifa and her likes as a people.
Okay. Now, obviously, Hanifa is not the first, neither is she the second child that such end, you know, have actually come to her. But I'm really curious, if at the end of the day, Hanifa doesn't actually get justice, now the court, the case has been adjourned to February 2nd, and we know how slow, you know, our justice system is, and a lot of people have actually said that it is because there is so much interest in this case, that is why the trial process has actually started. But if at the end of the day she doesn't get justice, what image does this create for Nigeria, both locally and internationally?
I can't sit down and begin to quantify what this does to us as a people. Because, like you rightly mentioned, Hanifa is not the first. We have seen all kinds of cases of horror, you know, linger perpetually in our courtrooms. So the damage will be terrible, and these are the things, this is a summation of things like this that affect the overall evaluation of a country in the international community. It's not whether you are making so much money or not. Most times it's also not so much about the quality of life, but of how justice is seen to be dispensed in an obvious situation like the case of Hanifa, where even the perpetrator had in an open interview admitted to this crime and all of that, you would think that, I mean, justice will be dispensed with as swift as possible, because it has implication for a lot of things. Sometimes, I mean, as we have come to learn, justice delayed is even justice denied. You know, because once people lose interest, it lose that steam, that concern that has been expressed. You know, whatever you do 3, 4, 5 years down the line would not you know, have the kind of impact that you would love that it have, especially in terms of deterring future occurrence. If people could do things like this and then they drag perpetually in the courtroom, others would not feel retarded. But if this person is swiftly brought to justice and justice is seen to be administered, then other people would know the kind of fate that awaits them should they want to try stuff like this. And maybe from there we can begin to change 1 or 2 things about our perception, one issue at a time.
You know, there's this, you know, way that Nigerians react, especially in these days of social media. Once something like this happens, you hear the outcry, you know, it's massive. And then 2 weeks down the line, or maybe 3 weeks down the line, and the story is forgotten and everybody moves on. So I'm just curious, you know, how can we sustain the pressure, you know, on people in authority to make sure that the right thing is done, you know, with regards to this?
That falls back on us, me and you as media people. In our journalism training, one of the cardinal points of our training is what is referred to as agenda setting, not agenda sending. Half the times we are doing agenda sending, we are focused on all the gymnastics that the politicians they brew, you know, and throw at us. What the president is saying, where he's going, what the National Assembly is saying, where he's going. This country is so much more than what happens in the villa or what happens in the National Assembly, where you have less than 1,000 people put together. You know, there's so much more going on at the grassroots. There's so much more going on at the local government. There's so much more going on at the state. And these things deserve national attention. And so what we can do as media houses who are committed to the cause of justice and for the interest of the public good is to find a way to stay on these issues and continue to highlight them until justice is done. You know, so that is largely a function of us. It is understandable because we are in a very difficult space. We need to survive. And it's a country where the turnaround on issues is so massive. You know, and we are on Hanifa, and then the Super Eagle crashes out of the Nations Cup, and all attention switches to that place, and then the next morning we are back to petroleum subsidy, and by evening it is the scarcity of fuel in filling stations.
Yes.
So it's crazy what we are contending with. I mean, it doesn't happen like
and
that.
And God forbid we do not have such a similar incident as well.
Yeah,
because,
you know.
if you look at the records in the past few weeks, it's been from one tragic story to another. We recall the story about a girl in the IDP camp who had to commit suicide, you know, after she was raped by an aid worker.
Yes.
You know, and then we'll also not forget the one in Maiduguri where a boy whose throat was slit.
Yes.
You know, and all of that. So they just like,
you know,
I mean, it's Sylvester, we've not recovered from, you know, the Sylvester
there was a lady
story.
in Lugbe. So
you know,
it's it mirrors the amount of frustration in the system. And that is not to say even in developed climes these things are not there. We are happy that now with the place of social media, these issues are becoming increasingly highlighted. But also is the need, you know, for society to wake up. Like as somebody said recently at the Trust Dialogue, this pocket of issues that are happening are in a way, maybe not coordinated, but in a way protest in some form. You know, certain things coming up spontaneously around everywhere is a sign, you know, it's a symbol. If we begin to connect the dots, that fundamentally there are things that are wrong.
There are issues. And
there are structures that need to be fixed.
The UNICEF, you know, is also raising another concern that I think that that's a close relationship there. Nigeria now is the highest, you know, is the country with the highest number of out-of-school children, 13 million. So if you think about such events happening in our schools, you know, and the tendency for parents now to begin to feel these children are not safe anymore. You know, let's not forget the abductions, the massive abductions, you know, of school children and all of that. How is this going to? What kind of? How urgent do we need to like really pay attention to the issues in schools these days?
Urgency, maybe since yesterday. it's an emergency, no doubt. And I mean, we hear of 30 million and it feels like we just woke up from 0 to 30 million. We've been at 10 million for so long.
Right.
Sometimes in 2010, we've been at 10 million for so long, and even at 10 million, that is alarming. That is the population of some African states in heaven's name. It's like looking at a country and nobody is educated. Looking at the population of a country and nobody is educated. And when we talk about education in this case, it's not necessarily going to the formal schools and even informal education. These guys do not have any survival tool. They just wake up in the morning and gaze at the sun and wait for sundown and find anywhere to sleep, and they wake up the next morning. It is the same story for them. And we have seen clearly how these out of school numbers have become ready recruits for all kinds of vices. I mean, we were hearing the other day at the Trust Dialogue where one of the speakers said there are over 30,000 bandits.
That's alarming.
And so when you think about it
alarming,
in terms of percentage, this number, in terms of percentage of the children that we have in the entire country, how many percent can we now say are in school, at a time like this in our country?
It's huge. And worst case in our scenario is that we have a young population. We have between 18 and 40, over 60% of our population, and that is a production age. And what happens anyway, if you have access to a woman and you don't have anywhere to go to for livelihood, what happens? You just keep reproducing. It's also the problem of this country. It's the reason why there are over 16,000 births every day in this country. You can't stop it. What do you do with a man and a woman locked out in a place they have nothing to do and just gazing at themselves? It's easier to control it when the man has something to do. He goes out, warn himself out, and come back, and the only thing on his mind is probably just food and sleep. And then he can reason. I mean, have you seen the number of births in the IDP camps alone? I visited even the one in Abuja here. Every girl you have seen in the IDP that is 16 years old already has a child or is pregnant. That is a disaster.
Okay. Now, before we wrap up the program, I'm really curious about this. You talked about agenda setting earlier. And I've looked at majority of the papers this morning, and it seems to me the whole issue of Hanifa and the issue of out-of-school children is a topic of interest for Daily Trust. Why is that so?
Well, it's not just. I don't think it's just a Daily Trust thing. But again, you would excuse that because Kano is a very stronghold for this paper, in terms of circulations and interest around what it does and all that. So we also have a social responsibility to keep people abreast with what is happening, and like we have said, it should become incumbent on us to do this. And you will credit Daily Trust for how it has followed up on issues of injustice like this. I mean, the Chibok girls' return request was on our banner for years. We did that with the Baptist school. We did that with several other schools, putting out timelines on how far, on how long they have been gone from their parents or from modernity. And that, in a way, is to exert pressures on people who should make decisions to protect the life of these young champs, that is being wasted. I mean, we heard from the Trust Dialogue of how in some of the terrorist camps, about 40 men were raped, practically gang rape, about nine females, and how that is a daily occurrence. Imagine you're 16, 17, 18 years old, taken from the school to some places, where, I mean, even inside your house in the current condition, you have to hide inside a duvet. Imagine somebody sleeping under the tree, and she wakes up and what they serve her as breakfast is rape, and at noon they serve her rape, and at evening. Even as somebody who's married, you can't afford to have that number of intercourse and remain sane. So it's a public accountability responsibility that Daily Trust does, and I hope that our colleagues from other places understand this nexus between the sanity of a society and where you have to practice even as a media platform to continue to highlight these issues in the front burner and sustain conversations around them long enough for us to begin to see the kind of changes that we desire. All right, quickly, before we round up, in 1 minute or two, I will just give you time to react to this story about, federal government backtracking, its stand on petroleum subsidy.
Just a few weeks ago, we heard that, oh, there's going to be a subsidy removal and palliative will be made available and all. And then
The Senate says the
here we
federal
go
government
now.
did not order subsidy removal.
You know, it was Fela Nicola Pakuti that sang, that has a song titled Confusion or something, you know. To think that everything we have heard about subsidy, whether it will happen or not, is coming from the same government is appalling. It tells you how much there is no synergy around what's happening. You know, 1 minute you say the GMD says it has to go, there are plans for it to go, and of course, indeed, there are plans because we saw the PIB progress until it was signed as a way to communicate to the world that we are now ready to manage NNPC as a business. And the finance minister said, okay, for us to ease this thing gradually, we have provided for 6 months of subsidy, and so we are on track for it to go. And then the Senate president shows up after a visit with the president and says the president is not aware that this is happening. And then they come back, they hold another meeting, and they say, no, it's aware there is a transport subsidy of how much millions that has happened, and then they come back, the same people that say, oh no, we have evaluated it and the timing doesn't seem right. And the economists are saying, but for how long would you continue to carry this anomaly? There is a condition that gives birth to the subsidy. Nothing has been done about it. We were having a conversation yesterday quickly, and just to give people a perspective of what has happened. The Dangote, among with his partners, bought into the Kaduna refinery and one other refinery when it was privatized before 2007. And then we went to the market shouting that, oh no, this is going to cause job loss and ABC and XYZ. And the Yar'Adua government reversed that privatization. It was after that reversal that the Dangote started building a refinery afresh and has sunk over $14 billion, building one of the biggest petrochemical complexes in the world. The government has spent half or more of that money doing turnaround maintenance in 4 dead refineries that have refused to move an inch. People have been employed in those refineries since this whole Dangote construction started that have risen to the point of directors and have not witnessed the refining of petroleum in that complex. And this is where we are today. So why do we continue to carry a dead horse, a dead asset that has produced nothing, but we have continued to fritter money away? I mean, is this not a sign that the government is not the best person to do business? Why not discard with this institution and allow people put in money and watch it work? Nobody who had bought any of those refineries, in my own opinion, would have watched it go comatose and continue to pay people who work in that place and promote them to directors without producing a liter of oil.
Sure. Well, very interesting insights there now. Well, thank you so much for coming on the program. We'll love to have you again.
My pleasure.
As usual.
But in a situation where you find that a person look like the same,
Not necessarily tribal or regional.
but I have said that